A child walks through the front door after school and calls for his mother. No answer. The kitchen is quiet. The television is off. For most children, this is just a parent running a quick errand. But for a child formed by end times preaching, the body reaches a terrifying conclusion long before reason can intervene. The people he loves are gone. The trumpet sounded, and he has been left behind. This isn't a theological debate or a study of Greek verbs. It is doctrine entering the nervous system as physical sensation. The stomach drops, the chest tightens, and the skin prickles with dread. Long before a child can explain the meaning of the blessed hope, their body has already learned to interpret silence as judgment. This visceral reaction is the direct product of a massive media ecosystem that has spent decades dramatizing abandonment. Through novels and films, believers are conditioned to see every absence as a catastrophic separation. When fear is packaged as entertainment, it turns the relational bond between a child and a parent into an invisible, recurring test of sincerity. Under this weight, ordinary time becomes threatened time. A driverless car, a pile of laundry, or the sudden silence of a neighborhood are no longer mundane details of life. They are transformed into the mechanics of an imminent countdown, making the future feel less like a horizon and more like a trapdoor. The world is no longer a place to mend, repair, or inhabit. It is a sinking ship, and the only task is to get the right people into the lifeboats before the vessel goes down. This theology effectively steals the future from the believer, replacing long-term growth with an urgent, desperate desire for evacuation. This obsession with escape relies on a specific way of reading the Bible, treating ancient symbols as a secret geopolitical map. Instead of looking for moral wisdom, this culture scans the scriptures to find direct correspondences with the evening news. In this framework, the beast from the sea isn't an ancient metaphor for Roman power. It's a stand-in for modern international diplomacy. Bodies like the United Nations are recast as the infrastructure for global rebellion, stoking a deep suspicion of any institution that attempts to organize human cooperation. The targets shift as the headlines change. The European Parliament is identified as the revived Roman Empire, while barcodes and vaccines are scrutinized as the potential mark of the beast. The goal isn't historical accuracy, but finding a modern container for an ancient image of evil. This creates a profound historical tension. For centuries, these apocalyptic images were used by oppressed people to find comfort under the weight of empire. To understand how that comfort mutated into a psychological trap, we have to look at what these words meant before they were used to sell books. Reading these texts as a mechanical schedule for the 21st century produces a state of chronic hypervigilance. The believer doesn't become more discerning, they just become more reactive, scanning every headline for proof that the catastrophe they were promised is finally arriving. The word apocalypse arrives today already on fire, synonymous with the end of the world. But its Greek root, apocalypsis, actually means unveiling. It describes the taking away of a covering to reveal what has been hidden. The original point wasn't destruction, but disclosure. This genre flourished during the Second Temple period, a time when Jewish communities were living under the boots of successive foreign empires. Their land, their temple, and their ancestral laws were under constant assault. History had become morally unbearable. The crisis peaked under rulers like Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He didn't just tax the people, he desecrated their sanctuary and outlawed their most sacred practices. The faithful were being slaughtered not because they had failed God, but because they had remained loyal to him. This is where apocalypse begins, as crisis literature. When the righteous die and the wicked rule, the older religious explanations for suffering stop working. The community needed a language that reached beyond the limits of visible history to explain how God could still be sovereign. These visions were a survival mechanism for a wounded people. They weren't intended as a secret timeline for future readers living in comfort. They were a way to insist that the empire's version of reality was a lie and that a hidden justice was approaching. To strip away the empire's legitimacy, apocalyptic writers used the metaphor of the beasts. While a kingdom might present itself to the world as a glorious golden statue, Apocalypse unveils its devouring, beastly nature. It reveals that the state's order is built on appetite and violence. This same remapping applies to heavenly books. Earthly records are written by the victors. They erase the victims and justify the violence. But the vision of a ledger in heaven promises that hidden witnesses exist, that the official imperial story is not the final one. This context also gives birth to the hope of resurrection. It wasn't an abstract doctrine about the afterlife. It was a moral demand. If the empire had the power to kill the faithful, then God had to have the power to raise them. In this ancient light, resurrection is a defiant act of vindication for martyrs who refuse to bow to a tyrant. It is the exact opposite of the modern rapture, which imagines a quiet escape for the church before the real suffering even begins. For the oppressed, these symbols functioned as a survival grammar. They were designed to prove that the empire did not own the final word over history, even if it currently controlled the prisons and the execution stakes. Over time, a tragic detachment occurred. As centuries of reinterpretation passed, these survival symbols were pulled away from the original political wounds that created them. They became abstract doctrines, floating free from their historical anchor. Modern religious entrepreneurs seized these drifting images and organized them into profitable, predictive systems. They took the poetry of resistance and turned it into an industry of Antichrist panic, where the ancient beast is constantly reassigned to whatever cultural enemy is currently trending. The historical irony is devastating. A theology designed to strengthen the powerless against empire was weaponized downward to control the vulnerable through fear. The apocalyptic thunder originally meant to put tyrants on notice was turned into an internal tribunal. Instead of exposing the violence of the state, it makes children search their own hearts for secret sins, terrified that a lack of sincerity will lead to their abandonment. In the hands of this industry, the apocalypse was transformed into a machinery of dread. It demands a frantic, reactive obedience, fueled by the conviction that the world is nothing more than a doomed stage for a final disaster. But the future does not have to be a threat. We are allowed to inhabit time, rather than simply endure it as a countdown toward destruction. The world is not a sinking ship. It is our home. Understanding where these ideas came from strips the fear economy of its power. When we see the beasts and the books for what they were, cries for justice from a wounded people, the modern charts of panic simply lose their authority. We can trade the exhausted hypervigilance of prophecy culture for the quiet dignity of taking moral responsibility in the present. We can plan, we can dream, and we can invest in the world without waiting for a trumpet to cancel our work. Time is not a trap, and the world is not merely a countdown. The life before us is still worthy of love, repair, and a hope that isn't built on fear.
Thank you for watching. If something in this resonated with you, then you're already closer than you think. If you're ready to go deeper, there's a link below to my book, The Invention of the End Times: How Ancient Apocalypse Became a Modern Industry of Rapture, Antichrist Panic, and Political Fear. This isn't theory, it's a framework you can actually use. Tap the link below and step into it.